My dad told me my inheritance was gone with the same tone he'd used to say the weather was turning. Calm. Almost proud of himself. Like he'd done something thoughtful. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just sat there at the kitchen table in my parents' house in Barrie, holding a mug of tea that had gone completely cold, and I looked at my boyfriend across from me. He was already looking at me. He reached over and put his hand on mine. That's the thing about Seth that my family never understood. They thought he was quiet because he had nothing to say. They were wrong about that. I should back up. I'm 31. I work as a dental hygienist in Barrie, Ontario, which is not a glamorous job, but it's steady and I'm good at it, and I like my patients. I have a one-bedroom apartment that I share with a cat named Potato. I drive a 2019 Civic with a dent in the rear bumper from a parking lot in 2022 that I keep meaning to get fixed. My life is ordinary and I love it. It took me a long time to love it, because for most of my childhood, ordinary wasn't something my family respected. My brother is 4 years older than me. His name is Cole, and from the time we were small, he was the one my parents pointed to when they needed to feel good about themselves. Cole got the car at 16. Cole got a laptop for Christmas when laptops cost more than a mortgage payment. Cole got driven to hockey practice 3 times a week across the city, while I took the bus to figure skating alone, and eventually, I just stopped going because it was too much and no one seemed to notice. I used to think my parents were just stretched thin. That's the story I told myself for a long time. 2 working parents, not a lot of money. Cole had more visible needs than I did. Then Cole dropped out of his second year at Laurentian University, and my parents didn't say a word about the $42,000 they'd fronted for tuition and residence. They just folded it into the family story like it hadn't happened. When I got into the dental hygiene program at Georgian College, I paid for it myself with OSAP and a part-time job at a grocery store and another part-time job on weekends at a coffee shop in town. My parents came to my graduation. They took a photo. My mom posted it to Facebook with a caption that said, "So proud." I remember looking at that post and feeling something I couldn't name yet. Something that wasn't quite gratitude. My grandmother on my dad's side, Gran, we called her, was the one person in that family who saw me clearly. She lived in a small house in Collingwood that smelled like cedar and the particular brand of hand lotion she'd used my whole life. She called me every Sunday without fail. She asked about my patients, my cat, my apartment. She remembered detail. She'd say things like, "Last week you mentioned that woman with the complicated crown situation. Did that get sorted?" And I'd think, nobody else in my family remembers anything I tell them. Gran passed away 3 years ago, just after I turned 28. She left me money. Not a fortune. Gran wasn't wealthy, but she had a small TFSA that she'd been quietly building for years, and she left it to me directly. $62,000. She told me about it while she was still alive, actually, sitting in her living room with her hands folded in her lap, very matter of fact. She said, "I want you to have something that's just yours. Don't let anyone talk you into spending it on something that isn't what you want," I cried. She didn't. She just patted my hand. I put the money in my own TFSA. I told almost nobody. I mentioned it to my dad once in passing, which I now understand was a mistake. Seth and I met at a farmer's market of all places. I was buying peaches and he was behind me in line, and he said something about how the vendor was underselling the peaches because they were actually exceptional, and I turned around expecting someone insufferable and found someone with kind eyes and a slightly crooked smile who looked embarrassed that he'd said it out loud. We talked for 40 minutes. I was late to meet a friend. I didn't really care. Seth is a project manager. He works for an engineering firm and he's good at his job in the quiet, unshowy way. He's good at most things. He drives a truck that's older than my Civic. He cooks and does it well and doesn't make a thing of it. He's from a small town north of Sudbury and his family is big and loud and they all talk over each other at dinner. And the first time he brought me there for Thanksgiving, I sat at that table and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Included. Like my presence at the table meant something to the people around it. We'd been together 2 years when he asked me to marry him. We were hiking in Algonquin. He did it at a spot where the lake opened up through the trees. No production, no crowd, just him and me in the water. I said yes before he finished the sentence. My parents met Seth 3 months after we started dating. My mom liked him immediately, the way she likes anything she understands to be uncomplicated. My dad was friendly enough. Cole came for dinner that first night and spent most of it on his phone. Standard. Things stayed surface level pleasant for about a year. Then Seth and I started talking seriously about the wedding, and my mom got involved in the planning in the way she sometimes does things, with a lot of enthusiasm that's really more about her than you. The wedding was going to be small. We wanted small. 40 people maybe, a venue outside the city, good food, live music from a friend of Seth's who plays guitar. Nothing expensive. Seth and I had talked about using a portion of my inheritance from Gran to cover it, maybe 20 to 25,000, and saving the rest. It felt right to use it for something she would have approved of. A life I was building. Not a performance. I made the mistake of telling my dad this plan, not in detail. Just that I had a number in mind and I was comfortable with what we were planning. He nodded. He said it sounded nice. The call came on a Tuesday in March. I was between patients at work. My dad almost never calls in the middle of the day, so I stepped outside. He said he'd done something he needed to tell me about. I remember going very still on the sidewalk outside the clinic. It was cold, the kind of mean March cold that doesn't let up in Barrie until April sometimes, and I was standing in my scrubs without a jacket. He said Cole had gotten into some financial trouble. He didn't give me details and I didn't ask for them, because I already knew the shape of this story. Cole had made some decisions, he said. There were debts. He'd needed help and he'd needed it quickly, and my dad he paused here and I remember the pause very clearly. My dad had transferred $50,000 to Cole. I said, okay, where did that money come from? And he said, we used the funds your grandmother left you. We still have access to the account from when we helped you set it up. I didn't speak for a long moment. I was watching a pigeon walk in circles near a dumpster across the street. I remember thinking that was an extremely normal thing to be watching. I said, you didn't have access to that account. That account is in my name. I set it up myself, and he said, you mentioned the institution once. I called and explained the situation. They had some paperwork. It took a few weeks. I can't fully describe what happened to me in that moment. It wasn't rage. It was something colder and quieter than rage. Something that felt like a door closing in my chest. I said, Dad, that was Gran's money. She left it to me. He said, your brother needed it more. You're smart. You're capable. You'll be fine. You've always been fine. I went back inside. I finished my patience. I drove to Seth's place that evening and I told him what had happened. He was sitting across from me at his kitchen table and he went very quiet. Seth has two modes when something is serious. He's either calm or he's a very specific kind of quiet that means something is being decided. That evening it was the second one. He said, we need to find out if that's even legal. It's not a short answer. TFSA accounts are individual accounts. You cannot transfer funds from someone's TFSA without their explicit written consent and identity verification. What my father described happening was not supposed to be possible. Over the next week, Seth and I made calls. We spoke to the financial institution. We spoke to a lawyer, a woman named, she doesn't need to be named here, who specialized in civil and estate matters. What had actually happened after a lot of untangling was this. The account my dad accessed was not my TFSA. It was an older joint savings that had been opened years earlier, back when I was 20 and my dad had co-signed something for me while I was getting on my feet, and which I had never formally closed. I had transferred money into it once, years ago, briefly, while I was between accounts. A smaller amount. Not 62,000, but enough. The bulk of Gran's money, the TFSA, was untouched. My dad did not have access to it and never had. What he'd done was drain the old joint account, which had about $11,000 in it from various deposits over the years. Not all of it from Gran's original sum. $11,000. Still mine. Still taken without asking. But here's what I learned from that lawyer. Sitting in her office on a Thursday afternoon, my father had contacted my financial institution. He had attempted to access my TFSA. He had been unsuccessful, but the attempts were logged. The fact that he had tried told me everything I needed to know about his intentions. Seth drove me home from that meeting. We sat in his truck in the parking lot for a while. He said, whatever you want to do, I'll back you up completely. And I said, I need to talk to him in person. And Seth said, okay, I'll come with you. My parents' house is 40 minutes from my apartment. I've driven that road so many times I could probably do it unconscious. The night we went, it was late April, starting to get warm, finally. The trees doing that thing where they're just barely thinking about leaves. My mom made tea when we arrived. Cole was there, which I hadn't expected but probably should have. He was sitting at the kitchen table already, like he knew what this was. He looked tired. He didn't meet my eyes. We sat down. My dad started talking before I said anything. Something about how he knew I was upset, but he needed me to understand the position they'd been in, the pressure, Cole's situation, and how I had always been the stable one, the one who could handle things. I let him finish. Then I said, I know about the TFSA. He stopped. I said, you tried to access it. I have the logs from the institution. You called and tried to have funds transferred, and they wouldn't allow it because you're not on that account, and I never gave consent. My mom made a small sound. I said, you did manage to empty the joint account, which had $11,000 in it, some of which came from Gran. Cole said, I didn't know how he got it. I said, that's convenient. My dad started to say something about how I had to understand family helps family, and Cole had a genuine crisis. Seth, who had been completely silent through all of this, sitting next to me with his hands on the table, said, can I ask something? My dad looked at him, slightly relieved, I think, expecting something softer. Seth said, when you called the institution to try to access Abby's TFSA, did you tell them you were her father, or did you tell them you were her? Silence. Seth said, because if you told them you were authorized by her, that's fraud. And if you told them you were her, that's identity theft. And I want to make sure we're all clear on which conversation we're having right now. He said it the way he says everything. No volume, no drama, just a statement of fact. The way he might tell you a pipe was rated for a certain pressure, and you'd better not push past it. My dad's face did something complicated. My mom set her mug down. Cole was staring at the table. My dad said, I would never. I didn't say I was you. Seth said, good. Then I assume you have no problem with Abby receiving a full repayment of the $11,000, plus any interest lost, within 30 days. My dad looked at me. I said, that's the conversation we're here to have, not an explanation. Repayment. There's a version of this story where my family pulls together after that, where my dad admits he was wrong, where Cole apologizes, where something cracks open and becomes something better. I'd be lying if I said I didn't want that version. Some part of me still does, maybe always will, but that's not what happened. What happened was my dad said he thought I was being cold. My mom said she wished I could see the bigger picture. Cole said he was sorry but didn't say what he was sorry for specifically. And I've learned that unspecific apologies are really just requests for you to feel better so the other person doesn't have to sit in the discomfort anymore. We left. In the truck on the way home, Seth reached over and squeezed my hand once, and then let go and didn't say anything else, and that was exactly right. I contacted the lawyer the next week. She sent a formal demand letter on my behalf for the $11,000, plus costs. I also filed a complaint with the financial institution about the attempts to access my TFSA without authorization. They launched their own review process. My father, I later learned, received a letter from them as well. Not in 30 days. It took closer to 3 months and went through the lawyer, but it came back. There was no apology attached to it. I haven't spoken to my father since that night in my parents' kitchen. My mother calls occasionally. I answer, sometimes. The conversations are short and stay on the surface of things, and I find I don't have a lot to say underneath that. Cole texted me in June. He said he was working with a financial advisor now and things were getting better. I said I was glad to hear it. That was the extent of it. Seth and I got married in September at a small farm venue about an hour north of the city. 38 people, local caterers, good food, Seth's friend on guitar, fairy lights in the trees. We used some of Gran's TFSA money, not $50,000, not even $30,000. We spent $16,000 total, and it was the best day of my life. I thought about Gran a lot that day. The cedar smell of her house. The way she called every Sunday. The way she said, I want you to have something that's just yours. At the reception, Seth's mom came and found me and held my face in her hands and said, we're so glad you're ours now. I cried then. Not sad crying, the other kind. Seth's family is the loudest table at any gathering. They bring extra dessert and they all have opinions about hockey teams and they call me for no reason except to say hello. I did not grow up in a family that calls for no reason except to say hello. I'm learning. Last month, my friend from work asked me how I was doing with everything, and I said I was fine, and she gave me the look that means she's asking how I'm really doing, and I thought about it for a second. I said, I think I spent a long time believing that being the stable one, the fine one, the one who could handle it. I thought that was a compliment. I thought that was what my family thought of me. But I think what it really was permission. Permission to expect less of themselves where I was concerned because I'd manage. I always managed. She nodded. I said, I'm done managing things that aren't mine to manage. I mean it. That's not a declaration to them. They don't need to hear it. It's just something I know now. Some doors close in your chest, and that's the right thing for them to do. Potato is asleep on the couch. Seth is making something that smells like garlic and butter. Tomorrow I go back to my patience, my ordinary careful work, my good ordinary life. Gran knew what she was doing when she left me that money. She wasn't just leaving me money. She was leaving me a signal that she'd seen me, that she thought I was worth seeing, that she wanted me to have something no one could just fold into the family story and pretend hadn't happened. They tried, in the end, but they couldn't get to it. Neither can anyone else.